So I'm James Mack, professor of chemistry at the University of Cincinnati. My first interest actually came when I was in graduate school. I was at a seminar and I had someone from the American Chemical Society talk about this area called green chemistry, which I'd never really heard much about. This was in the mid-90s. And she kind of talked about what it was and some of the research that's been going on. It was a very beginning field at that time. And some of the things that she said I didn't believe would work, honestly. I thought, no one's going to do that, and that's too hard, and so on and so forth. And so after the seminar, I went up and talked to her, and I said, it sounds nice, but I just don't think the way that we're trained right now and all the things we're doing, we're going to be able to do a lot of the things that you're talking about. The things that she was talking about were doing reactions in water, that I just didn't think that was feasible at the time. And so she said, okay, well, I'm glad that you feel that way because you're the type of person that we need to come up with new ideas to figure out how we should be doing it if you think we're not doing it appropriately. And that always stuck with me because I fully believe that either you're going to try to contribute to solving the problem or you're just going to be a naysayer. And I just don't believe in being a naysayer. So it always kind of thought about it in the background. So that was my first experience with it. When I thought about what I heard at that seminar and how would you do it better, one of the reasons why I thought this could work is at that time they were talking about using and doing things completely differently than people do now. And that to me was a completely different culture change from my training. I just couldn't envision the culture changing that much. I came across something called mechanical chemistry or ball milling. Which is basically you don't add a solvent at all. So it's almost like you do the same thing that you would normally in traditional chemistry, but you just put it in a different vessel than you used in the past. And it was actually easier to do than the chemistry. And I thought, this way might be a way a lot of people could do chemistry because you're not really changing the fundamentals of chemistry, you're just using a different vehicle. That was a change I thought could be made and started investigating that a little bit more. And when I did, we started getting some success. And so now that's what we do, and that's how we do our chemistry. And so we try to understand how do you do chemistry in the absence of a solvent. And that impact is typically solvent waste when you do a chemical process represents roughly around 85% of all of the waste that's generated in a pharmaceutical process. So if you think about a lot of the pharmaceutical drugs that we make and take as people in society, 22 times that amount is the amount of waste that's generated. So what our research group tries to do is produce the same type of thing and limit the total amount of waste that's created. I think for me personally, in terms of sustainability, is trying to figure out how to close the loop on things. So anything that I do, you try to figure out what the waste product is and can that waste product be utilized in another area or not? Is it a dead end or is it a part of a cycle in some place? So recycling, that terminology, is the cycle part of it. You got to close the loop at some aspect of it. So a lot of times we don't think about waste in terms of anything for the most part because we just want it to go away. When there's a garbage strike, then we notice it. If there is no garbage strike, then it just goes someplace. And I think a lot of times we got to understand what happens to the waste and any byproduct that we have, and then try to understand how can we might utilize that byproduct more. There's always going to be waste. These things cycle through, and we don't think about when we get rid of one thing, what happens to the thing we got rid of, because we're always interested in the new thing that we have. So I try to think about what's going to happen to the waste product and how can I help put that into a cycle in some kind of way. I think the long-term sustainability goals for UC and the city is really going through and trying to figure out what waste products do we have and who can utilize them. I think a lot of the times that we do something, there's an assumption that if it's not valuable to me, how could it possibly be valuable to somebody else? And I think a lot of the greatest innovations have been people who have connected and come together and said, wait a second, that is actual feedstock for something that I need. But we don't communicate effectively all the time to be able to do that. So I think one of the things the goal should be is try to identify waste and what are we wasting significantly, whatever that waste may be, whatever category it's in, and then trying to figure out who can utilize this in ways that's not being utilized now. So one of the things that we probably don't do very well is we figured out the recycling thing to an extent, but there's people who figured out composting and all aspects of what goes into someone's what's called landfill trash cans. We don't spend a whole lot of time talking about who it's valuable to, whether it could be valuable to an animal. I'm sure there are a lot of valuability that's in a lot of things that we throw out. We just don't understand its value. And if we get people to come together to really understand its value, then I think we can close the loop on that cycle, which is not happening now. I think probably a lot of things end at Rumpke, and then that's the end of the cycle, and it just sits there. But I think there's some utilization that could be made if we kind of communicate together.